Well, that didn't last. Hmm. You're back.
We are back, and I'm going to be very careful here. Everything is very finicky, but we are live here. Charles Moscowitz, welcome to the program. Everything is functional now. Michael D. Shaw is here. Mike, how are you?
Just great. Back from the kind of road trip I used to take as a young salesman back a million years ago.
Yeah.
Kind of took the starch out of me, but here I am.
Where are you headed? Were you headed out of state?
Now, it
Or
was Pacific Northwest.
okay.
And for those of your viewers that live in that area, they wouldn't be surprised to hear, the ride from Seattle to Portland, it rained the entire way. So,
Okay.
and
What's
then the rain
happening up
came
there in
back down
Seattle?
to LA. So here we are.
What's happening in Seattle? I understand there's a lot of kind of not anarchy, but homelessness and just I don't know. It doesn't seem like things are flying quite right up there.
It didn't, I don't know. There were parts of it that looked a little different from what I remember.
Yep.
And again, it was mostly, seeing people on business. We didn't have time to tour around. Pike Place is still there, of course, and any old Starbucks person knows that location. But yeah, it was, those towns have, let's say, changed since I was younger. So,
Are people talking about Canada and the relations with the United States, or is that an issue that?
that came up a little bit. That seems to be more of a thing in the East, I
Yeah.
guess, because certainly, BC is more socialistic, but Alberta toward the west is very pro-American, and they would probably join as the 51st state in a minute. So
Well, I mean, it's all interesting, and I kind of titled the program today "Coup Against Trump" only because in the midst of everything, I just have maybe it's a nervous feeling about knowing or somewhat knowing the enemies of Trump and what they're capable of. I know that just before the election, I was having a complete meltdown over the possibility of it being stolen. I mean, you might remember
yeah,
that. And I sent a note at the time to Steve Turley, who's been on my program,
right.
and he was very good, but he was really Trump is crushing it. He's nailing it. Look at these polls, and every show, and he's talking about the incredible victory. And I just kind of cautioned him that maybe he's engaging in too much happy talk because it doesn't matter whether he's ahead in the polls. The enemy will take him out no matter what. And he accused me of being too traumatized by the last election, that that we too much of a naysayer.
Well, I
And
don't know. I mean, it worked out better.
yeah,
I think that he won in 2024 anyway.
it did. And now he's like hitting the ground with he understands the nature of this enemy, and he's going after them without any compunction in a way that it's only great. I mean, it can't even be. I have no problem with anything he's doing. He really understands what's up. He's being very cool, and the enemy continues to. And when I say the enemy, reasonable political opposition is fine. that's the American way. I'm talking about something much deeper than that, though. These are people who, there's a saying, and I can't quote it, but it's from the Chinese philosopher Sun Tzu, or
Art of war, yeah.
yeah, Art of War, where he says that there's a type of enemy that's willing to burn down the entire country and turn everything into ash rather than let their opposition get any victory at all.
Right.
And I think that's what we're looking at here. They don't care about, obviously, the welfare of the country, the will of the people, all of the conventional things that we assume most Americans care about and do. They care about stopping Trump. And I think that now that Trump is really showing his hand, they're probably more determined than ever. And who knows what they're going to pull off. I mean, right now, it seems like their main card, and I say this both from the news and also from continuing to follow Mark Elias on Twitter, because he's a truth teller. He's one of the main architects. He was one of the architects of the Russia hoax, of the perfect phone call impeachment, of the lawfare programs, all of it. And he is touting the fact that they are winning in courts because they have well-placed judges, basically threaded throughout the entire system, who are willing to rule against President Trump's agenda, in spite of the fact that most of what he's doing has been done before by presidents, and most of it is part of his purview under the Constitution as the chief executive. They're just, I mean, even today, I mean, they're like that rotten law firm, Perkins and Coie, which is behind most of the things I just mentioned. They are having their privileges restored by a judge in terms of having direct access to government information. These are the arch enemies of Trump. On what grounds constitutionally do they get that ruling?
Well, here's the thing, Chuck. You're right. Their only tactic is to use these, as you call them, well-placed left-wing federal judges. But the problem is that's all they've got, and it's ultimately going to fail because obviously it was never the intent of the framers that the entire executive branch could be subject to the whims of some moronic federal judge somewhere, and it's going to turn. So
I agree, but it's going to slow everything down, and
well, it'll slow everything down. But that's all they've got. And in the meantime, what they should be doing, if they wanted to regain some influence, is to get away from their terrible positions. But instead, they're doubling, tripling down on
yes,
men and women's sports and whatnot.
right. Mm-hmm.
So they're going to self-destruct, and then
Right.
all that's going to be left at the end
Yeah.
are the apparatchiks, the Mark Eliases of the world, and that's fine. And they don't have the people anymore. Okay.
I think you're right, and that's the rosy picture that I agree with. I think that they are beholden, it turns out, to some very powerful money people, some donors who are funding the agenda that's so unpopular. I mean, example is like women's sports, men and women's sports, and the trans agenda, funded by the brother who wears a dress of Governor Pritzker. Right?
Yeah.
This guy, the brother is multi-billionaire. This family, they own the Hyatt Regency hotel chain, and he's a trans, and he funds and threatens to cut funding to any Democrat politician who goes against his agenda. George Soros is another one. He's still pouring money in. He had poured in $250 million that was given to him through USAID. You've got, still that guy up at LinkedIn who funded one of the lawsuits against Trump. That crazy woman who said that Trump had attacked her at Bergdorf Goodman.
Right.
He's up. They've got these big money people. Another one is this guy Steyer, who is a real leftist and who's a multi-billionaire. And I think that they are simply beholden to these people, and they're trapped by them. And it's going to hurt. You're right. It's going to make them irrelevant because their agenda is unpopular, it's unnatural, it's undemocratic, and it's un-American. And they're going to continue to sink. But they do have these judges, and they are going absolutely crazy. I mean, they have a guy now or this woman, I think it's a Chutkan, one of the lawfare judges, has said that you can now publish and expose people who are working for Elon Musk's Doge. I mean, that's like in other words, their lives are now under threat now that their names can be published in the media. You now have somebody who has threatened the life and threatened to kill Amy Coney Barrett's sister and her family. Now, she's a wobbly judge anyways.
Yeah. I mean, which is pretty ironic because if she's a conservative, then I'm the Easter Bunny.
Right? Well, the point is that they're making sure, they're doing a little insurance because she's somebody who would respond to that. And they're threatening the lives of people who are involved here. And that can have a big impact. Nobody wants to be in that position. Ultimately, you need to take care of number one. And I think that it's going to get that kind of ugly as things progress and as they continue to double and triple down. They are not, going quietly. And I mentioned Coup because I think that's something that could happen. I think that even this judicial activism is a form of a coup. It's an insurrection by judges. And I don't know quite what can be done about them. I mean,
what's going to happen is, unfortunately, it's going to have to play out. But understand that Trump is taking down 60, 70, 80 years of a feckless bureaucracy. And as I put in my last article, the whole problem with all this is it was a scam from the beginning. They never had any intention of curing poverty. They have no intention of doing anything right. It's just a front to launder money. That's been proven so many times.
And the classic example is USAID, which is only one of the legs in the octopus. And I mean, it's quite clear the way they did business, and probably had done business all the way back to probably the days of Lyndon Johnson. I think Kennedy was sincere when he established it with a very limited mandate, which was to deal with humanitarian crises around the world. They're very appropriate, and they do that, but it's only a small percentage of what they do. And by the way, that percentage has been taken over by the State Department, and it's continuing. So they're lying about that. But the problem is that it expanded to the point where it became a money laundering scheme where federal monies to the tune of billions, if not even trillions, were basically run through it as a way to pay off foreign oligarchs and communists and revolutions and color revolutions. People like, as I said, George Soros, who apparently got pretty big checks from them. And all by giving money to these shady and these non-governmental organizations.
Right.
And I think that that's only the tip of the iceberg. So there's huge amounts of money flowing around, and they're not going to give it up quickly. I mean, they're going to fight for that, and who knows?
They're going to fight, but this is a big disruptive action, and shame on us and all the idiot politicians on both sides who never did sort of the obvious thing of, gee, we spent $26 trillion on the war on poverty, and we still had poverty, okay?
Right.
We spent $1 billion on the Department of Education, and we have the worst scores in the developed world, all right? So, but the funny part of it is watching the protests, all right? You close the Department of Education, which he's doing.
God.
What argument can you make for the Department of Education?
Keep on the bureaucracy. I know, really. I think that, as you mentioned, more and more Americans are waking up, which scares them even more. They're waking up the beast. And I think that might make them go crazier and get even uglier in terms of what they're capable of doing. The Department of Education being a classic example. I mean, Really? Can you point to a single thing that they've ever done that has improved the education of a single child in this country? Do we have anything? I mean, they were put in place in 1978. Has anything gotten better since the trillion? How many hundreds of billions of dollars? Has any scores gotten better? Has our math and science functionality gotten better amongst younger people? No, nothing has gotten better. And so, I don't know. They can't defend that. And here they are attacking Musk by burning electric cars and threatening his life. It's just so ugly. I can't believe
No, it
what.
is ugly, but the left has always been ugly, and it's always about destruction. All right, you want to know what happens when Department of Education disappears? LA School District has a facility called the Bimini Center, whose sole purpose is complying with federal regulations. So there's all kinds of people employed doing whatever they have to do to comply with these regulations. So it takes on truly a life of its own.
And now they're all going to be
And here's
knocked
the
out
thing.
on the street because who needs them now? Because the regulations are being undone. I mean, a great example. I mean, it's incredible what's going on. I mean, Lee Zeldin, the head of the EPA.
Oh, the EPA is an expert, yeah.
I mean, he just announced that they're going to save the regular taxpayer and businesses upwards of $1 trillion by cutting just this list of regulations that was so onerous and so unproductive in terms of actually doing anything for the environment. And he's going in there with a chainsaw. He's cutting it all out. He is, and I think that so far, most of the agencies, the one little disappointment to me so far, and again we'll see, is Pam Bondi, in that President Trump signed an executive order calling for the release of all of the information about Jeffrey Epstein, about the JFK assassination, the RFK assassination, and the Martin Luther King assassination. And so far, she hasn't done diddly squat. I mean, she's like, we're studying it. Really? What do you mean studying it? It's been sitting there for 50 years. What more to study?
Well, here's the problem, okay? If you're Pam Bondi and you have, as you and I know, will come out of the JFK, this was an inside job.
Right. Yeah.
So how is it going to play with the proverbial housewife in Iowa that it was the government that killed their own president? All right. Now, I mean, the point is the fact that they don't want to release it makes it more obvious that that's in there.
It does. And it's going to be a huge change when they do release that, if they ever do, assuming that it's still there. I mean, I can't understand why in cases like that, the information wasn't just destroyed. I mean, when I studied years ago, I did a pretty deep dive on the career of Senator Joseph McCarthy.
Right.
And I found out from a book I read about that most of the information about him has been destroyed.
Yeah.
Like, for example, when he first announced it, he had a list of 52 members of the U.S. State Department who were communists and who were actively helping Stalin. And he made that list available. You can't get that list anymore because it was destroyed. Somebody literally, there was a pamphlet published and put in most libraries in the United States. You can't get it because somebody or some group went into every single library and took it out and destroyed it. It's gone.
Yeah.
We'll never get that list. I don't understand why they don't do it now. I mean, if there's something that's that bombastic in that file, why? I mean, I would assume that we're never going to get it. It's probably been destroyed.
No, you're never going to get it because they feel you can't handle the truth.
Right. Either that or they want to hide it. They're covering up their own ass. There's like a lot of information there that applies today. It could literally change the way we govern this country if we find out what really happened, because there are people who have sort of are the proteges of that. It's very current, even though it happened a half a century ago. It has everything to do with completely altering the way we understand our history and the way we understand, which affects how we see things now. History, understanding history helps you understand the present and the future. I mean, that's why history is important. It's not
Well,
just
I mean, some of
studying.
these things
Yeah.
you just have to put together on your own. Uh, the whole conduct of World War II,
Right.
how the Russians are our allies until they're not. I mean, there were all sorts of suspicious things going on that,
There always is. I mean, there's still information that's classified from the War of 1812.
yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
we could go back. I mean, it's all of it. There's no reason to have any of that classified. Obviously, the people involved in it are long dead, and we ought to have a complete and total rendering of the past in every.
I mean, the people are long dead, but the fact that it would betray or expose is a better word
Mm,
that this was all BS. I mean, you and I know that,
right.
but you'd be surprised if you go into a crowd of otherwise intelligent people and you start saying things that you and I, think are pretty obvious, but it doesn't comport well with the high school version of American history. Uh,
Yeah.
it is kind of depressing.
It's people have been conditioned that they're not ready for it. I know what you mean. I discuss only a tiny fraction of what I
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
even in my own family. I mean, and it is depressing. It's that people don't, there's people have their biases and they want to stick with them and they want to live under the Lester Holt rules of the world. Everything is kind of controlled. I mean, and Lester Holt himself, I mean, he acknowledged at some kind of an award ceremony that he said, well, objective news is passe. I don't know exactly what he said, but it's like it's no longer the way to go anymore. We need to be advocates. We need to, tell Americans what they should think. And he admitted this in a speech, and yet people seem to like, oh yeah, I guess so. I mean, a classic example. I think I mentioned this last time. Walter Cronkite, right? Kennedy was assassinated. He announced, after probably being told what to say by the CIA or whoever, that it was the lone gunman, and that was that, the lone nut, and anybody who questioned that would be denounced as a conspiracy theorist, as if there's something wrong with considering conspiracy.
Well, conspiracies make the world go round, right? I mean,
Of course. I mean, the conspiracies happen all the time. The question is which ones are good and which ones aren't. I mean, the job
right.
of our media of the Fifth Estate is to look into these things and not attack people or groups who claim them. You investigate. You
Well,
find
there were
out.
people, if you remember, Dorothy Kilgallen, who was a
Yeah,
writer in New York, was on the show What's My Line. She didn't believe the official line of the Kennedy assassination, and she was whacked.
exactly. That's right. And she knew things because she was investigating.
Yeah,
That's happened to many good journalists. I mean, we could even recently the Pizzagate. Not to get into a subject, but
yeah,
Liz Crokin and Ben Swan, both of them established journalists. CBS, I think one of them works for, journalism school. They got degrees. They fell upon that story and they reported it, and they've both been removed from public life.
yeah.
They've both been denounced as kooks. Don't listen to them. So it can happen. People once in a while. I mean, first of all, I mean, there's an incentive for people in the media to not say anything because you'll lose your job, you'll lose your career, and they make examples every so often of someone to let them know what's happening. It's like, as I said, it works like the auto da fe in medieval Portugal, where they wanted to remove anybody that was not Catholic at the time. That included Jews and Muslims. And so they would make a public display of someone who had defied the powers that be, and they would be publicly humiliated, and they do different things to them, and it was pretty ugly. And it kind of sent a message to the whole population don't mess around with us. Don't defy the establishment, whatever it may be, or else this will be
Yeah.
you. This will happen to anybody. So that's what they do. They do an auto da fe of someone in public, where they're denounced, and they're held up for incredible ridicule. And most of it is lies. Even if it isn't lies, it's still, greatly exaggerated. It's a performance. And the message that people get is to keep their head low and to keep their brains empty. And that's why, you have these women in the suburbs who can't hear anything other than, and it's like they need smelling salts. Whatever happened to feminism in the real sense? They're fainting, right? Oh my God. Who is this? I mean, it's a sad spectacle. And Trump is coming in as a disruptor, waking everybody up. And that's why I can't believe that I mean, I just pray for him every day and Trump is like, I mean, this is a unique person, a kind of person that comes along once in 100 years. Steve Bannon is correct when he points out that Trump should be able to serve another term, because it's different. It's unusual. You don't get this opportunity every day. I mean, I would even say this to normies. You look at the Bushes, you look at the Clintons, you look at the Obamas, they're all the same. They're all stooges of the establishment. They didn't do anything to rock the boat. They did nothing to distinguish themselves. They just kind of glided along. Whereas Trump is somebody who's come along and he actually is doing something. He's actually changing the way we function in this country. It's very unusual. There's no one quite like him. And I don't think there's anybody even in his own circle that's quite like him. And so, he should be able to stay in there for another term.
Well, the only thing that's even close, I guess, if you combine Woodrow Wilson, Teddy Roosevelt, and FDR in terms of what they did to build up this gigantic bureaucracy.
Right.
Well,
Trump is all of those people in reverse.
Yeah.
They did make a difference. They did change the country, mostly for the worse. Yeah. But they had huge impacts in their day, whereas Trump is undoing 100 years of this rotten transfer of power to these unelected international bureaucracies. That's their agenda. It's been their agenda since self-avowed, self-described socialist Woodrow Wilson took over. I mean, that's it's an entirely new way of thinking, and so that's why I'm worried. Every day that goes by, more people are waking up. And they're seeing these lies that are coming out. The media is losing more credibility. They're not in any way reforming. I think there was like a moment there where I thought I had a glimmer of hope that maybe they might, wake up or there might be some change. I mean, this is crazy, but I thought that might be the case when Morning Joe and Morning Mika went to Mar-a-Lago after having spent 8 years completely trashing Trump at the very head of the anti-Trump movement. And anybody who watched them, I mean, it was completely delusional. It was utter garbage. And there they are at Mar-a-Lago. I thought, hey, maybe they're seeing the reality of the fact that they want to stay in business. Maybe the forces of the market are playing a role here. I don't expect them to change literally, but at least maybe they were open. But no, they've gone back to the same. I mean, you watch them, it's like a bad old reel of tape. I mean, Rachel Maddow. I mean, the same people that it's not changing. It's getting worse, if anything.
Well, and it's like the old, again, they know their brand, they know their market. Now, why in the world it's worth $25 million a year to pay Rachel Maddow, I don't know. But evidently, there's a core audience for this kind of crap.
Yeah, but it's dwindling, I think. Yeah. I mean, the New York Times is now laying people off.
Yeah.
CBS, I think that they say might even be sold. I mean, they are losing ground. Fox has not Fox. Well, Fox has no great shakes, but it's not that bad. But MSNBC, right? And they finally got rid of that shrew, Joy Reid. I mean, that race baiter.
Yeah.
It was just too much. I think The View is taking a hit. They are dwindling. I'm not sure it matters because there's some big money behind it that'll just keep them going. I know that George Soros, for example, about a year ago, apparently he fronted the purchase of something like 200 radio stations around the United States, including some very big and influential ones, like one in New Orleans, which apparently is a legacy station. Now, I don't know, if that means he's going to start to fire conservative talk show hosts or maybe put on some left-wingers. It's never worked for them. They've never had successful left-wing talk show hosts. I mean, they certainly tried, and they've certainly put people in there.
You remember Air America, right? That was
That's right. I think, was it Ed Schultz? He actually switched over to left-wing so he could get a job there. And you had like, what's his name? Tom Hartman. And I mean, they never made it. For a while, they had all their hopes on Mario Cuomo. It was like the great white hope. I mean, it was millions of dollars, and it was a big launch, and this is it. He lasted, I think, no more than 2 weeks. It just didn't happen because nobody wants to hear it. Even liberals don't want to hear it.
Well, there's no such thing as a populist left-wing movement.
Yeah.
How could there be? Because the left wing is based on this authoritarian, all-powerful government. How can that be populist?
Exactly. It's not. And then so all they can do is tear stuff down. I mean, it's a negative, unnatural outlook to, as Obama would say, reinvent. In other words, to destroy everything that has developed at the beginning of time, where you have a conservative process by which truths are identified and falsehood is winnowed out. Instead, they want to reinvent everything, and nobody wants to hear that.
You can spend all the money you want, but you cannot create this audience. It isn't there.
Exactly. And ultimately, somebody has to write a check for something, and it's not unlimited. And maybe with Trump tightening the screws, with like getting rid of USAID and some other things, maybe we'll be able to starve them out. It's like the Romans laying siege to a city. You stay outside, and eventually they starve to death. They start eating the rats. There's nothing left, and finally they come out. Maybe that's what's happening. They're going to be. We'll starve them. We'll just continue to cut off their checks, and eventually they're going to come out and they're going to look bad. That's my hope. I don't know.
Well, you can already see it happening. Look at what's going on with your friend Chuck Schumer.
Now, I understand that he was, they're going to shut down the government. Even the liberals are going against that. Even the Boston Globe today, which is about as big a mouthpiece for the left as you can get. They're like, well, he's stuck between a rock and a hard place. Either he gives in to Trump or he shuts down the government and everybody blames him. That's big for them to admit that. I mean, they would never, so I don't think he's going to pull it off. And, there's all these little skirmishes, like one in Wisconsin where they're trying to steal an election for a judge seat. I guess that in Wisconsin, they elect their judges, and that's a state that has a lot of election fraud. See, they're going to shut me down on TikTok for this, right? TikTok, there it goes. Let's see. No, I'm still there. Okay. Let's be careful here. But let's just say that in Wisconsin, already they're finding stuff going on. There's a whistleblower there now saying that they're rigging the absentee ballots, and they're doing the same bull crap that they've done. And it's a very significant election because the judge, apparently, the seat, gets to decide on districting congressional districts, and they're going to eliminate the Republican congressional district for the next election. Steve Bannon is talking about this. They're trying to do it in New York State by grabbing Elise Stefanik's seat and putting in somebody who I think is at best a rhino Republican. And basically, they're trying to steal the House for the next election. And if they do, then the first thing, and Hakeem Jeffries becomes Speaker, the first thing they're going to do is they'll start impeaching Trump. Now, what happens if they impeach Trump? What I would suggest, just in looking at this in advance, is that the Republicans should just ignore it. The Republican, we shouldn't worry about it. Let them impeach him. Let them do an impeachment a week. The fact is that the Senate is going to throw it out, and to give them any attention is only going to fuel it. So they'll have their, I wouldn't even, if I was the Republican House, I wouldn't even go to the hearings. Just no comment. We're not getting involved. Let them have their stupid impeachment. They'll look completely asinine, and it'll just go nowhere. They'll do their impeachment. They'll have their headline. It'll be thrown out by the Senate. Then a week later, they'll do another one, and they'll just continue to do it throughout his term. And if we ignore it, it's like ignoring the Nazis in Skokie, Illinois. It's sort of like, fine. Every time they do it, it's going to become worse and more irrelevant. And I think Trump will just continue to get stronger. So that's my thought on that. If God forbid they steal the House and they start impeaching.
Yeah, well, but isn't it interesting that everything you mentioned in terms of their tactics has just been negative stuff? And the problem is they can't come up with a single positive thing. They never could. And even when it looked like it was positive, like in 1964, the war on poverty, it was a scam. They don't have anything. They've got nothing.
They're hoping that the economy gets bad. And the economy is going to have a slight recession. I mean, according to Treasury Secretary Bessent, he's talked about this on with Steve Bannon, that we're going to have, there's going to be an adjustment, and it's going to take maybe a year for things to start to turn around. It's because that we've inherited this horrible inflation from Biden, who is printing money so fast. I mean, we now know billions of dollars going out the door, mostly overseas, so who knows who. And it's going to take a while to turn that around. But the thing is that they're going to play that and say, oh, you see, it's Trump's fault because of the tariffs, which, by the way, is good public policy. Tariffs go back to Washington. That's what governments do. I mean, it's sensible to raise funds that way and to even out tariffs that are imposed on us by even Canada, apparently, huge tariffs on American goods. This is a way to bring back and to protect American labor and American industry. It's that simple, but you're not going to feel it right away. There's going to be a period of adjustment, and that gives these demons a chance to go in. They don't give a damn about the economy or about anything positive. They're going to go in and characterize it and demonize it just because it's Trump. They know that it's going to result in better economy down the road, but you can't do these things. Don't just turn on a dime. I mean, it takes a while. It's a complete shift in the way American economics has worked since Wilson. I mean, it's not just political, but economically, it's a shift away from the Keynesian model, which is borrowing and printing money, and a move more toward raising funds from fees to do business in this country, which protects American industry. And it's going to take a while to do that shift. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be pleasant. I expect huge propaganda campaigns against Trump. I don't know if it's going to work, but they still have the high ground in terms of the media, and they can still try to do this.
Say that, but how many people get newspapers anymore? How many people watch TV news anymore?
Yeah, apparently they're not reading the New York Times anymore. Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, I think that, who knows?
The influence is waning.
I think so. And, obviously Trump is changing everything in terms of how we have functioned in this country. Yeah. The use of the tariff system is something that Lincoln was a big tariff president. FDR was a big tariff president. I mean, it's not new. These things have been used as a way to protect the American economy. It protects industry. It protects, everything in this country from the dumping from overseas, which we're being taken advantage of. Trump is absolutely right about this. And it's going to improve American capital, but not right away. I just think people need to understand that.
Well, the other thing that's happening in Europe is they're worried about old age pensions in Germany because now they're going to have to give more than 20 cents to NATO. I mean,
No, because of Trump now threatening to pull American troops out of Germany and Italy,
yeah.
which he should do, probably should have done it after the collapse of the Soviet Union. They're now going to have to come up with paying for their own defense, and they're doing it. It's the first time. I mean, in the past, Obama, various American presidents would make a little noise about this. Oh, but they didn't really mean it. Trump means it, and they're going to have to now cough up their own dough. According to the paper today, Putin is now on board with a ceasefire in Ukraine, which ends that war, that horrible war that Biden and his crew started and promoted and profited from to the tune of hundreds of billions of American taxpayer dollars disappearing with that corrupt regime. I mean, look, I want to make sure
how corrupt that regime was. Some of the weapons ended up with the Mexican cartels.
Oh, I mean, and they all got fat in their pockets. I mean, Zelensky, what is he? He owns like $100 million mansion in Florida or something. I mean, it's completely corrupt. However, I support Ukrainian nationalism. I think that I don't want to see Russia win, but there's going to have to be a ceasefire, and Europe is going to have to step up in terms of securing and helping Ukraine, not the United States. I mean, that's what Trump's position is. And that's why Zelensky was kicked out of the White House, because he was saying, you have to give us security guarantees. In other words, he wanted American troops on the ground. That's not going to happen.
But it's another example of what tends to happen. Instead of him acting like a human being, he just became doubling down, tripling down, acting like an idiot, to the point that he got thrown out of the White House.
Well, apparently he had been tampered with a few hours before by a group of Democrats and Rhino Republicans whom he met, and who kind of ginned him up about, they tried to sabotage. In other words, they wanted to sabotage Trump's developing a ceasefire because it helps Trump. They don't give a damn about thousands of Ukrainians being killed and Russians being killed in a meat grinder, or the fact that parts of Ukraine probably look like Dresden right now.
Yeah.
They don't care about that. They just wanted anything to stop Trump, anything to make Trump look bad. Trump said they'd get a ceasefire. Ha ha, look at this. Well, the fact is that they are getting a ceasefire, and it will lead to a settlement, and that NATO will not, be in Ukraine, and that they're going to have to readjust that border, and that's that. And they'll have peace.
Well, it's already started. Okay, so they'll come up with this accomplishment of Trump. All right, you got ceasefire in the war, but you know what? What about inflation? And if he solves that, well, you know what? He hasn't cured cancer yet. And if he does that,
he even said that in his speech. I mean, he points to that, and meanwhile they're scowling. And Elizabeth Warren, who, by the way, has pocketed $50 million since she's been in the House, in Congress. I wonder what she did to get that money. She's there, with this kind of sourpuss, looking so miserable, and sitting on their hands. It was just a disgusting spectacle, one that's completely backfired on them. They look completely ridiculous and bad.
They didn't even stand up for that cancer kid.
Oh my God, I know, really. I get the fact that they're not going to stand up for the mother or for a girl who had her brains knocked out by a guy in a volleyball tournament. I think that's horrible that they wouldn't stand out, but that contradicts their agenda for having men and women's sports. Right. But for that kid with the brain surgery, I mean, give me a break. It's just, it's so awful and so insulting, and I think that it really made them look horrible. And I think, wasn't it that one Who is that woman that she's a reporter? She looks like a chipmunk. I forget her name. You know who I mean. Um, she made like insulting comments about him, about the kid.
Oh, right.
I forget her name. Oh
Yeah.
man, Nicole Wallace.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, she's horrible.
she
She's
has a,
horrible.
not to be mean, but she has a face like a chipmunk. I'm sorry, but yeah, really bad, really nasty. These people it really is a case of Trump derangement. They cannot say anything positive. I mean, it's like they would, it's like these little robots. It's just, and I think that more and more people are seeing this, and it's not wearing well on them. I think it's waking more people up. It's like, how long can you sustain that? And anyways,
Well, you know what? I think, though, that we're still better off than what happened in Canada. Do your viewers know that this guy that was elected to replace Trudeau
yeah,
didn't live in Canada for 10 years? He's a European.
and he's not, and he wasn't really elected. I mean, how did it happen that all of a sudden he's catapulted into office and he's a
He
complete?
got 85% of the vote.
Was there a vote at all? I mean, I
Well,
understand.
the reason I hate the parliamentary system is it creates absurd situations like this. Okay, you don't have what we would call a democratically elected president. You simply have someone who's the head of the party that happens to have the most seats in parliament. All right.
Right.
And if there's a no confidence vote, I mean, Trudeau, his father was no great chase.
Right.
The son, who was really Castro's son, oh, whoops, we lost TikTok.
Oh, it's a spitting image of Castro. I mean, that's clear.
So now they put in a guy that didn't even live in Canada.
Right.
He identifies as a European.
I think he's a banker. I mean, wasn't he like central bank? I mean, he's kind of BlackRock, or he's like, the who's that German? What was it, Charles Schwab with the or Klaus Schwab? You can eat the bugs. That kind of stuff. But he's already done damage. He's already canceled billions of dollars in American debt instruments. He's retaliating against the United States. So I don't know if it's going to make any difference.
No, it's going to be worse for them because Canada can't win a trade war with the U.S.
They're not in a position to do it because their economy is tiny. Apparently, the poorest state in the United States, which I think is Mississippi, has a higher standard of living than any Canadian province.
Yeah.
And I think when Trump first said, that Canada should be the 51st state, there were a pretty large number of Canadians who were like thinking about it. Right? They're like, oh, okay, maybe. Trudeau, everything he touched turned to crap, and the country has gone way down. So we'll see. Maybe Canada could be annexed. I know Pat Buchanan talked about this back in the 80s. It's not new. Canada, from the time of the American Revolution right up to Teddy Roosevelt, Canada was an enemy of the United States. They were not our friends.
Right.
And the War of 1812, the United States invaded Canada and lost in the Battle of Stony Brook, I think it was. Mad Matt Denton, one of the general, Mad Matt Wayne. He just didn't do a good campaign, and he ended up losing. But, it's sort of like, they weren't seen as friendly until Teddy Roosevelt, who was an Anglophile, all of a sudden a globalist in that way. Not a bad guy, but not those big problems with him, that he embraced, a friendship with Canada. So who knows? Maybe they could be annexed.
What about Greenland?
I think Greenland is definitely something that, I don't know if it should become an American state. I don't think it has enough people in it to be an American state. There are certain qualifications. If you study how each of the territories became states, starting with Ohio, they had to reach a certain level of population. They were different. And I think that's a constitutional phenomena, that they had to achieve certain, issues in order to get statehood.
Well, right. In the case of Greenland, though,
they don't have that.
With the new party winning unexpectedly, And
Is that a pro-American party?
yeah, well, yes. Well, let's put it this way. It's a pro-independence party.
Right.
They don't like the Danes. They may not want to be completely under the influence of the Americans, but if you have 57,000 people in the whole country and deals are cut for mineral rights
Mhm.
and military rights, you can make 57,000 people pretty damn rich.
That's right. It's like Alaska, that people that, I mean, everybody in that country could get a nice fat paycheck. I mean,
Yeah.
just for being there. So yes, that could sway things. And Denmark hasn't done anything for them. It's just
No.
old colonial arrangement, and they don't want that any longer. So yeah, I mean, I think that Greenland will be there. And also, speaking of that, didn't Trump come out? If I correct me if I'm wrong, but he said that he wants to cut Puerto Rico free, that Puerto Rico should be independent because it's going to save the American taxpayers something like $100 billion a year that we're pouring into that country, probably ending up in the pockets. It's like Ukraine, it's worse. So he's like, hey, cut them
Oh,
free.
super corrupt. Super corrupt.
Totally. Although I actually had a conversation with a Puerto Rican national recently, and she said to me that the majority of Puerto Ricans want to keep it as it is with the the Commonwealth status, and you have the statehood people who she supports. She wants Puerto Rico to be a state. This person, but they don't have quite enough polarity, and the Commonwealth is very corrupt. And then the independence movement is basically communists. That's like
Yeah.
Castro, Maduro. I mean, and they're not popular in Puerto Rico. So, I mean, who knows? But Trump is very innovative in that way. He's already taken back the Panama Canal. The Chinese contracts have been rescinded. In that China, starting in at the time of Clinton, I remember this was an issue. They had bases on both ends of the canal. That's gone, and the canal is no longer charging American shipping. So, they've capitulated to Trump. They don't want to have the country. They don't want the canal zone to be taken back, but they had to fulfill the arrangement in the treaty, and they've done it. So that's a big success.
That hasn't been well publicized either.
No. I mean, Mexico is playing ball with Trump. There is movement on the border, military movement right now that indicates that there may be incursions with the help of Mexico to take out the cartels. And it could be like, a military operation, very much like, well, I mean, under Wilson, there was an invasion of Mexico, the Veracruz campaign. There could be something like that. And I think Trump will do it. And I think that it's going to be a tough job, but they can take those people out. And Mexico will cooperate. So these are all positive developments. Even Venezuela, under Maduro, has agreed to take back, illegal aliens. So, this is the United States is we have the swagger again in the world. I mean, it's there are just extraordinary developments that have not been well publicized. Israel, look, I mean, Trump got the ceasefire in Gaza. Even the Biden people admitted that. A few weeks before Trump took the oath of office, they had a ceasefire because there was a combined Trump-Biden team of negotiators. But even the Biden people, including Anthony Blinken, admitted that it was Trump who got that ceasefire. Otherwise, they had nothing. I mean, the Biden people didn't do, diddly squat on that. And, it's kind of like, because Trump said, hey, if there's not peace over there when I take over, all hell is going to break loose. And the Hamas believed it. So they capitulated and they have the ceasefire. In a way, it's sort of like what Eisenhower, look, I'm not a huge fan, but I think he was in many ways quite good. When he was elected, between the time he was elected and took office, he went to Korea and he met at Panmunjom with both sides. And he told the North Koreans that there was going to have to be a ceasefire, or else when he takes the oath, he's going to use a nuclear bomb. And they believed him, and they got a ceasefire, and it's held up ever since. So, the use of power can be very effective. Now, whether he was bluffing or not doesn't matter. The fact is they believed it, and he probably wasn't bluffing.
No, I think that at that point, he was so sick of war. And he had this epiphany that he'd spend, whatever time remaining and try to wage peace. I mean, he was at the forefront of all that stuff.
He was, and he hated the Germans, apparently. Yeah. According to his son, he hated the Germans because of what he saw there. And even to the point where, the Japanese were allowed to surrender in a dignified ceremony on board the USS Missouri, and they came in their dress uniforms. It was very much like Appomattox Courthouse, where there was like a signing of a surrender document, and there was speeches, and it was very kind of done in a classic style. But for the Germans, I mean, Eisenhower was like, "F you, we're not doing that." He sent a sergeant over to get the signature. I'm not going to even see them. I'm not going to acknowledge them. He just hated Nazi Germany. He wouldn't give them any.
Who ended up signing these surrender documents for the
Nazis?
Yeah,
I think it was, at that point, Hitler was already either dead or he had been smuggled to Argentina, according to Dr. Jerome Corsi, who wrote a book about this, and who I think is a very credible source, and I interviewed him. It's interesting. But putting that aside, the head of Nazi Germany in the last weeks was I think it was Keitel, or was like a Admiral Keitel, who functioned from Kiel, which is near the Danish border.
Right.
And I think that he signed the document, and then he served a prison sentence, I think, of a couple of years. He wasn't involved in the war stuff, but I think that's how it happened. I'm not sure. Great question. I don't know, but I know that Eisenhower wouldn't give them the time of day.
Well, I mean, it's funny. I always wondered about it because as a kid, you'd see the picture of the USS Missouri and the very formal.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, wait a minute, what about, they had.
What happened with Germany? There they are with their brass uniforms, and they was all with the hats, and it was all done like very official, and it was done with respect. Germany got nothing like that because there was maybe just because Eisenhower, he didn't want to give them any traction at all. But here we have Trump basically reestablishing America's presence in the world, reestablishing peace on major fronts of war, and nobody says peep about it. They're all like ignoring it, like it didn't happen. It's just interesting. I mean, Trump cares about his ego because he wants the Nobel Peace Prize. Well, guess what? He should have gotten it years ago. I mean, I don't think. I mean, fine. I mean, it's bizarre. Meanwhile, they give the Nobel Prize to Obama 2 weeks after he became president.
Yeah.
It's like, well, even Obama shook his head on that. He's like, "What did I do?" It was just so so discrediting.
Well, he accepted it though.
Oh yeah, of course.
And the money went along with it too.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that went right into. Obama got very rich from the presidency, I think, as did Clinton. But here we are. The beat goes on. Trump is just crushing it on every front. It's incredible. Every day is like Christmas morning. You're gonna see what's under the tree today. It's like, and I just, but I feel a sense of foreboding. I just do, because this.
Oh, no, I mean, that's you.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope it's just me, because I just don't trust. Maybe Steve Turley is right. I've been traumatized by that stolen election. Well, excuse me, TikTok, block your ears. STOLEN election. Okay, they haven't shut me off in TikTok yet. That's still forbidden, that topic, but who cares? Everybody knows it, and it shows how this big fat media control has failed. It just didn't fly. It didn't stop Trump. He won anyways, and they better get used to it.
And they haven't learned a damn thing.
That's right.
In the analysis on one of the networks, I think it was MSNBC, how did Kamala Harris lose? And it was Joy Reid, I think, who said, well, I don't know. She did everything right. She had all the celebrities for her.
And then she spent how many like $100 million on basically giving checks to Oprah and Al Sharpton and Beyonce and everyone else to endorse her. And just shows how corrupt they are. It's just disgusting. Anyway, what's coming up on the Substack? Anything interesting?
Well, I'm going to get I'm thinking of a couple different topics. I mean, one of the analogies I've been thinking of is, remember when Pan Am finally went out of business?
Yeah.
There was a Lockerbie terrorist attack that did it, but they were in bad shape for a long time. And it was being exposed. They had 83 different vice presidents. They had this massive overhead. The Pan Am building kept them going, and just their extremely large cash flow sort of could hide the serious problems they had. Now, if you compare that to the U.S. government, with this enormous, as it were, cash flow, but still, it's going to fall apart unless you control the spending.
Right. Well,
there's a lot of clients of that spending, and those are the people that are screaming and yelling about it. But it either had to happen or the country would just fall apart.
It's a great metaphor, and we have at least a chance of saving the country. It may be too late. I don't think so. We've got some excellent people involved there besides Trump. Howard Lutnick is no slouch. Russ Voigt at the Department of Budget. These are people who've been in the vineyards. They know what's going on. They understand. Besant, they've been talking about this for years, and they have a good handle on it. And we have a hope and a chance to save the country. It's really what it comes down to. Yeah. And we can just hope it's not too late. I don't think it is. I feel optimistic about that, even with my worries about President Trump's problems dealing with this conspiracy. Even with that, I still think that I'm hopeful. And I think
the main advantage is there's not a lot of popular support for this conspiracy. There may be a lot of money behind it, but even George Soros and Pritzker's brother/sister are nobody's going to be stupid enough to just keep pissing away money forever.
Exactly.
And they'll restart, and that'll be that. It'll just fold up like a cheap suit.
I hope from your lips to God's ear. Anyways, Mike, thanks as always. Talk to you next week.
Onward and upward, and don't be so worried.
I know, exactly. There's just a feeling of excitement that goes with a feeling of foreboding. So
because you can hardly believe how well we're doing.
I can't believe what's happening. It's incredible. It really is. It's just every dream is coming true. That people, and I'm not the only one. I think we all feel that way. Yeah. Even people don't like Trump. At some level, they know that things are going pretty well, and they're relieved that we're not the alternative, which would have been World War III.
Well, yeah, I mean, when we go back to that Ethel Rosenberg about the UN thing, there are people that are very upset that their world view just ended up being proven to be crap. And, well, what other way are you going to put it? So,
and I think that you're going to have a change that's going to last long after we've shuffled off the mortal coil. It's going to be a generational change as a result of this, God willing, and I think it will happen.
All right.
All right, Mike.
We'll see you next.